Now we're rolling, Damage Plan MMA podcast. I am Jason with the new host,
Oh,
Blake O'Rulian of the Damage Plan MMA podcast. Blake, how you doing, man?
Jason, I appreciate it, man. I miss having you here. I miss having you here like all the time. And so before we turned on the cameras, I was like, you got to do the intro. You got to do that legendary intro.
You put
Um,
me on the spot, man.
a couple weeks ago, I think it was right before the Challenger Series card. It was kind of funny. You were like, can you just find a way to get it back in there? Find a way to put it in there. So I typically do it in the show open voiceover, but I'm so glad that we get the authentic, actual Now We're Rolling. How did that all come to be? I know the story, but I know a lot of people don't know why you started every podcast with Now We're Rolling.
So I had this teacher in Michigan before I moved out here to Salt Lake City. I had this teacher in ninth grade. He was my math teacher. And every time you'd get like three answers in a row, four answers in a row, he'd tell the whole class, now we're rolling. Now we're rolling. And it just stuck with me all these years. And I'd say it on occasion. And then when we started the podcast, I thought, man, this is like the perfect time to say that. So stuck with me. Don't ask me the teacher's name because I don't remember. But I'm glad it stuck and we're using it for a good cause.
Dude, I love it. I absolutely love it. And I love hearing all about kind of the podcast and how it came to be. I've been on the record to say that I think that what you and Zach did is one of the most legendary things in the history of Utah MMA. I mean, for me personally, your names are up in the rafters. Your jerseys are retired forever when it comes to what impact you had. And I truly believe that the Utah MMA fandom is large in part because of you and Zach. So I kind of wanted to know, starting this up, I don't really know, like, how did it at all come to be? How did you meet Zach? How did it all happen?
So we take it back. Gosh, I think I've known Zach. And we did the podcast for 2.5 years, probably 4 or 5 years now. I think I've known Zach. We actually met at Steel Fist Fights. I had a booth there. He had his insurance booth there. So we just naturally, we're both talkative guys. So we just start talking sports and we're talking MMA and fighting and basketball and football. And he's like, man, I want to do a podcast one day. I'm like, hey, you know what? That'd be pretty cool. And dude, we talked about it for almost a year. And funny thing is we could never nail down like when we wanted to do it, how we're going to do it. I started talking to some guys at the gym, a guy at the gym that had a podcast, and he kind of got the ball rolling. I got us set up at the community college in Sandy. Well, Zach lives in Kaysville, so it's kind of hard to commute. And I actually interviewed two people by myself, more for my nutrition stuff. And Zach called me and he's like, "Hey man, I think we should just keep it MMA." And I'm like, "Dude, I just wanted to get the podcast rolling. I would love to just do it, but get your butt down here." So he started coming, man, and the ball started rolling. And we, we started it with the idea of, fighters first. We just want to give fighters the opportunity to give them the platform to sell their fights, sell their sponsors, talk about themselves. It didn't matter if you were 0-0 debuter or, you know, fighting in the UFC. We had UFC fighters on there. We've had judges on there. We've had referees on there. We've had just a little bit of everybody on the podcast, and it just grew organically. We weren't trying to do anything crazy, and we just get on there twice a week and just record.
So in the early days, because I kind of jumped in when it was you two in separate places and then a fighter joining in.
Yeah,
I forget the name of it was like Bird Eye or something like that. There was some sort of name for it, the live streaming that.
StreamYard.
Yes, yes.
StreamYard, yeah. So once COVID started, so we were recording at Salt Lake Community College, and we were bringing guests there. They have a room set up you can use for free. It was awesome. There's a guy there that helped us out with the audio. It was amazing, and it was nice to have that in person, connection there. And once COVID started, we were like, man, we're just gonna have to do it over Zoom now because COVID's hit and we didn't know what else to do. And then that kind of picked up. It allowed us to bring in people from out of state, um, people that couldn't make the drive down to Sandy. So it just opened up the door for more things.
Yeah. So when did it start? You said 2.5 years, but you and Zach have kind of been removed from it for a minute.
Yeah,
What was like the first episode of Damage Plan?
the first one, oh man, I don't even remember who the first guest was. I don't even remember. It was probably, I know Yeah, we had Thomas Harper on really early. We had Arlo was on Gagas. I can't remember. It's Arlo. I apologize. I can't remember how to pronounce your last name, but Arlo was amazing. Strength and conditioning coach, jiu-jitsu guy. He does those truck pulls out at the salt flat. So super interesting podcast. Those were kind of some of the first days where we're just interacting with the fighters, and then we're both gambling degenerates. So we start talking about UFC fights and breaking down UFC fights and doing our picks, and then it just evolved from there, man.
It's incredible. And it truly brought together so many people. And I believe that kind of gave you like a pathway to calling the fights for Fierce. Is that correct?
Yeah, so that we had an opportunity. We did a couple steel fist cards when they had some needed some fill-ins. We replaced there. Cody had us do one down in Price, which we did one with Chris Curtis. We did one with
Jordan Levitt, right?
Jordan Levitt. Zach and Jordan Levitt did that one. I wasn't a part of that one, but I was there. And then after that, Cody had approached Zach, and I hope I'm not speaking out of turn, and said, "Hey, I want you to run the show." And what nobody knew, and I don't even think Zach talked about it on his podcast, was Zach Sajan, who doesn't get enough credit. Shout out to Sajan, who is kind of the man behind the scenes. If you know Fierce Fighting Championship, go introduce yourself to Sajan. He is a freaking stud. The three of us had been planning on starting our own fight promotion. We had a little war room, Zach with all of his fighters and his connections, and I was looking into stuff with getting a loan through the VA, and we were talking to potential donors and sponsors to help us get the money generated. Like we were like, hey, we're going to do this. And then Cody approached Zach and said, hey, I don't really want to do this anymore. Like I'm getting tapped out. I think you're the guy for it, And Zach's like, I mean, I'd love to do it, but I got to bring my guys on. And Cody's like, I don't care who you bring on. So he brings us on. Zach's running it, and it just kind of steamrolled, man. It was a great opportunity. Like Zach said, he pretty much gave him the keys. It was his dream job. It was a huge opportunity for us, and we just kind of took the ball and ran. And I think after about the first show, Cody started seeing the excitement. He's like, well, I think I still want to be involved a little bit. So it's been an amazing ride, man. It really has.
So that's really interesting. So you and Zach obviously were kind of a team, but then
Yep.
Zach was really, really focused on kind of taking over the show, and Sajan was kind of behind the marketing. Where did that leave you? Were you just like podcast manager, get content out kind of a situation, or what was that like?
So initially, I was going to help with some of the matchmaking. I was going to help with Zach a little bit on the amateur side because I'd gotten to know a lot of the fighters with interviewing them. So I knew the guys, especially all the local guys. I was going to help with like the sponsors. I had some good relationships with some sponsors. So we were all just kind of had our little kind of our roles, say Sajan with the marketing. I obviously have the apparel stuff. So we kind of combined the apparel stuff. We were going to incorporate, we have our website still up. Damage Plan MMA podcast is still up, where you can go there and get insurance, my nutrition stuff, which I'm not doing any longer. We can get into kind of why I had to take a step back here in a little bit, but yeah, man, the three of us we were ready to go, man.
Yeah. And I mean, you guys really turned it into something special. And I kind of know, you stepped away and all of that, but I do kind of have to ask you, I mean, you are removed from the podcast. You don't host it every single week. Those days are kind of gone. How much do you miss it?
A lot, man. I every time I think about it, it was like it was fun, man. It was just something that we could look forward to every day. My grandma lives in Michigan. She listens to the podcast every week, and she loved it. She loves you too, by the way, Blake. She's going to see this, and she's gonna love it. But she had a little notepad, and it was just something that I could talk to her every Sunday about. She'd have her favorite fighters listed on there, and it was, man. I hated taking a step back, but it was something. It was a call that I had to make, and it sucks, but hey, it's still going. I'm glad you've taken over. You're the man. So.
Well, I do want to say this really quickly. I want to meet your grandma, and I would love to even interview your grandma one of these days. I know you
I don't
talked.
know if she. I don't know if she'd go to the interview, but yeah, that'd be awesome, dude.
She seems like such a sweet lady from all the conversations that you tell me about. And I think that's really something special. I do kind of want to just dive into that really quickly. I mean,
Yeah.
I've talked to your wife. You're just completely open. I mean, your wife trains at the same gym that I was training at before we moved down south.
Yep.
You obviously train at Sierra as well. So we've talked, Cherie and I have talked about you and your relationship with your grandma. What makes you two so close?
Um, I was the first grandchild. So I think that, that kind of hit it off. Once I moved out here so I moved out from Michigan out here to Utah to live with my dad in high school, about my sophomore year in high school. And, it was hard, growing up around. My family was really close. It was just my dad here, didn't have aunts or uncles or grandma and grandpas here. It was just my dad. Um, Probably the best thing for me, not probably was the best thing for me. Um, but my uncle passed away when I was in the Marine Corps, and I got into the habit of calling her every Sunday just to check in. And it got to where her and my grandfather were, if I didn't call, it was a problem. So it turned into every Sunday, call grandma, tell her what's going on. My grandpa, he had some throat problems and couldn't talk, but he would listen on the speakerphone. And it's been rolling for almost 25 years now, every Sunday. And I can count on one hand how many times I've missed on a Sunday.
It's
Less
incredible.
than less than one hand of how many times I've forgotten on a Sunday to call my grandma. So, yep.
I love that story so much. It just on a personal note, man, it just warms my heart. I think that's one of the
I
coolest
appreciate it.
things. Let's kind of jump back into the MMA side of things.
Okay.
I do want to ask you on the podcast side, what over the 2.5 years that you did it, 200 plus episodes that you did, what is the most memorable interview from the podcast?
Oh, that's easy. Uh, Will Dunkel and Steve Sharp. If you have not watched that podcast, we need to put it in the notes and find that. Parental guidance, a little advisory there on that. It's for 18 plus for sure. But I think that podcast honestly just set us off. I mean, everybody knows that. People are still talking about that podcast with those two. Um, if you know how the fight ended, I just wish those two would run it back, because that was amazing, man. Out of all the podcasts we've done, the ones that Zach and I have done together, when we would break down fights and then we would bet against each other, those were always a lot of fun too, because we're both stubborn, and he picks his guy, I pick my guy. And I had a little thing where I'd wear different hats. If I beat him, I had a genie hat that I would wear if I'd get it right. So I had my little genie hat that I'd wear, and he'd hate it. So
Oh, I love it. And I love and I kind of miss seeing you and Zach kind of interact in that sort of way. It's so funny to watch how you two are with each other, but specifically during the podcast times. So we transition from, meeting Zach, you start the podcast up, you start calling fights. What was that transition like going from doing a podcast that's it's a little bit more of a safe environment. I mean, when you're calling fights, you're live. You don't want to say anything incorrect. You don't want to say anything that can get you in too much trouble. What was that transition like for you, transitioning from podcasting to calling fights?
super hard. Really hard podcasting. I mean, Zach's a natural with the podcasting, and honestly with calling fights, with him being a fighter. I wasn't training at the time. Um, so I leaned on him a lot. I leaned on his knowledge a lot. He obviously spoke a lot. As we started going, and we get a year and a half in, I started feeling a little more comfortable. Once we started calling fights, the first couple, once again, super hard, because I hadn't been in the cage. I'm not a fighter. So it was hard for me to speak on things I didn't really know about. It wasn't until we got in with Fierce that I said, I need to start training. I want to know what it feels like to have somebody on top of me, have somebody on my back choking me, have somebody punching me in the face sparring. And, obviously I'm not in a real fight, but at least I got an idea of, hey, if somebody's got me mounted and I can't get up, I can sit there and see that guy in the cage and, like, okay, this is what he needs to do. He needs to get his frames and get his hands on his hips, shrimp out, things like that. It's been a learning process. Obviously working with you and seeing how passionate you are and how passionate Jordan is with doing this, um, made me study a lot more, made me pay attention to what I said a lot more. In the beginning, it was just, hey, I'm just going on here, I'm just having fun. It's a local show. I didn't didn't really think it was that big of a deal, but it really is. If you want a professional promotion and you want a professional broadcast team, you need to have guys like you and Jordan doing this. And I can't thank you guys enough. I think I tell you after every show, I learn something every show. I'll catch myself saying stuff every show where I'm like, okay, just be quiet. Let Blake talk.
Well, I first of all, I do want to say, I think you bring a sense of clarity, and you also bring you make the broadcast a lot more fun. I mean, no, you're not, a clear-cut broadcaster who's, from point A to point B as a complete broadcaster, but you bring such a reality to it, and you bring such a sense of community. I don't know what it is about you, man. I think people just love you, but you bring
Appreciate it, man.
something that I can't replicate. Joel can't replicate. Anyone that we bring onto the show, we can't replicate what you give, and that's why you are so indispensable to our show. I do want to. I think the funniest thing is that you did not want me to call fights when that first happened. I think that is the funniest story, dude. You just got to tell it really quick. I think it's so funny because of how close we are now, and how, like, I literally
Yeah.
text you every day.
Yeah. Oh yeah. We talk all the time. I love it. And then us training together, and me choking you out all the time. And it's totally a joke.
No, no, no.
Blake's always choking me out. But
Me a couple
no,
times.
so Zach had built up such a camaraderie with this podcast, and we had already called a couple fights together. People knew who we were, and he's like, "Hey, I want to bring in this Blake guy," and I'm like, "Who's this Blake guy? Like, I don't know who this guy is." And even Sajan was like, "Zach, you don't know what you're doing. Like, this is stupid. Everybody knows you and Jason." And Sage and I were just like, "This is like the worst thing ever." Well, fast forward to that night, and I can't remember which fight card it was, but we were at Agima, and I
Fierce
met you for the
Challenger
first
Series
time.
2.
Fierce Challenger Series 2, and I met you at the Agima gym in the Provo Mall, and I'm like, I really like this kid, man. Like, yeah, obviously I was a little biased because I felt like we had something rolling, but once I met you, I saw how passionate you were about it. I saw how passionate you were about the fighters, and it was just, and from there it was just, the ball just kept rolling, man. It was great. So yeah, I originally did not want you on the broadcast.
I think that's like the funniest thing, truly, just because of how close we are now. Like how much, like, I'm like,
Yeah.
I've told Jordan before, and and just in conversation, not in any sort of like, important way, but I've just been like, if I don't have Jason, I can't do it, like, right now. Like I can't do it without him. Like, I truly believe that. And Jordan and I, the director of the Fierce broadcasts, we talk, and he's like, man, Jason has just skyrocketed into someone who is not just good at his job, but truly great, and so aware of what it's supposed to be like. When do you feel like you kind of started to evolve and change? Because we've seen a growth in you, and I don't
Yeah.
know how easy it is for you, but when do you think broadcasting started to get a little bit easier, or that you kind of did start getting the ball rolling?
I think it was, honestly, it was pretty quick. I want to say it was towards the end of last year, the beginning of this year. I would watch the fights back, listen to myself, and I would catch myself saying things, and I would listen to you. I would listen to the UFC, and once again, I circle back to, I see how much work that you and Jordan put into this, and I felt like I needed to step it up a little bit. So I was doing my homework. I wanted to make sure that I was doing my part. You know what I mean? I didn't want to just come in there and just like, hey, that just wing it. I didn't want to just wing it anymore. I wanted to make sure I was doing it right. And you can attest to this. I usually would call you, hey man, if I'm doing something wrong, please tell me, because this is your guys' world. You're not going to offend me if you're like, hey Jason, shut up, don't say this at this time. I just don't know. It's not my world. And like I said, when I first started, it was just a, hey man, I just like to talk. I want to have fun. I want to joke around, but there's a time and a place for it. And we want to be the number one promotion in the West, and we're not going to do that unless we have a professional broadcast team. And I think we have that. I know we have it. Not think, I know we have it.
What would you say is the hardest part for you about calling fights?
I think just for me, not being a fighter and not being in the cage, you listen to the UFC, and obviously those guys can speak on things, and I'm very careful on what I say and how I say it. And and how I'm critiquing a fighter, because I've never been in there, so I don't really know that feeling. I've never made that walk into the cage. That's probably the hardest part, and I know there's other promotions out there that have guys that haven't fought before, and that's why I take my training so seriously, and learning when I'm at the gym and paying attention to what Pedro's saying, listening to Joel about the striking. Um, but yeah, just taking the job seriously.
So I want to go from the hardest thing to your favorite thing. First, I'll ask you your favorite thing about calling fights, and then I've got another favorite thing to ask you about.
Can I circle back on the hardest thing?
Of course, of course.
Calling Joel's fights. It's easily the hardest thing I've ever done. And you know it because you called some of your fights for some guys that you've trained with. And training with the guy, I'll never forget his first fight that I called was with
Kesley?
Styrewalt.
Was it
Did I
Kesley or
call the
Styrewall?
Kesley fight? I don't know if I called the Kesley fight or not. I can't remember. I think I did. And I was nervous, man. The Kesley fight, I was nervous because I knew Joel was good, right? But I'd never seen him. No, I didn't call that fight because I watched it. I remember watching him walk down the ramp, and I knew he was good. Um, and I'd been training with him at the Phoenix PI with Hector and Lauren. Shout out to Hector at the Phoenix PI. I had been doing those 8-week fight camps with him, so I knew how his conditioning was. I mean, I was there every day with the lifting and the sprinting and all the conditioning work. I was there with him 5 days a week. And I'm pretty sure it was the Starwall fight. Anyways, so I see him make that walk down down the ramp, and you see his face. He's such a nice guy. He's always smiling, and to see his face and to see him switch modes,
He turns it on.
something special, man. The kid is something special. But yeah, calling his fights, man. Oh, man, yeah, man. It's just like, hey, man, that's my boy. That's my little brother out there, and you don't, you never, you don't want to see him, lose, but then again, it's like, hey, that's part of the game, and I know he knows that, and we know that, but it's hard, man. But yeah, that's definitely one of the hardest.
And that can be so hard on top of that because you know them beyond fighting. And even bigger picture, everyone listening, I mean, some
Yeah.
of them might know that you know them or that you're friends, but other people might not know. And so you have to find a way to be straight down the middle when
Yep.
it's like, to be completely honest, I mean, I care so much more about this other fighter, in one specific corner than the other, but you can't make it sound that way. And it can be really tough.
he well, I remember the Warren fight for the title when he fought Warren. You and I didn't think he looked very good in that first round, and Eric Iman was the only one that said, hey, like, he's doing really good. He's countering off the cage. He's moving well. I didn't see it until I rewatched the fight because I was so focused on, don't give, like, try to put all the positives onto Warren, so I'm not trying to sound biased. And I was too biased towards Warren, and I wasn't giving Joel enough credit in that first round. And it wasn't until he walked back to the corner where, and I saw Warren was bleeding from the nose, I was like, oh, Joel was catching him in that round. So yeah.
Can I also just say that September card, one, was so good, but two, having Eric Iman was so awesome. He was great, man. He was so good.
He's such a stud, man. He's such a stud. We have to get him back.
I loved having him on. Okay, so now I do want to jump over from the hardest part, the hardest things about calling fights. What is your favorite fight you've ever called?
Oh, the Joel fight with Styrwalt when he dropped him with the body shot. I think you just posted it last night. He
I
dropped him with
did.
the body shot. And obviously I trained with Joel and I know he was working on that body shot, and for him to deliver it, it was like, oh, it was just nice, man. It was cool to see. It was cool to watch. It was cool to watch the training all come together. And it was just, I felt like a proud uncle or something. You know what I mean? It's like, that's my boy in there.
I do kind of want to jump back over to you starting to train.
Yeah.
That was a big thing. And you've now been at it for well over a year now, if I'm correct, right?
Yeah. About a year and a half now. I don't get in there. I try to get in there at least once, sometimes twice a week. And for those people that know me, look, it took me about a year just to get comfortable with going in there. First 6 months, I hated it. I did not want to go in there. I would sit out in my car, my stomach's churning. I'm like, I, I'm not that aggressive person. That's not me. I was a bodybuilder. I got on stage in my shorts and pranced around. And um, it was hard, man. It was a hard adjustment, but the one thing that I can say about training is I loved being in there. I love being in there with the guys. I love that camaraderie that everybody has in there. There's something about, sweating and bleeding with somebody and going through hard times with some people, you know, man, female. It does something to you, man. It gives you an appreciation.
I will say this too. Jason is very humble. He's really good. Like
No,
I'm not just saying that. Like the guy is good. Like I
it's you're trying to embarrass me on the podcast,
no,
but that's all
I'm
right.
not. I'm not. I mean it. I think like I remember the first time I rolled with you, I went, "Oh my gosh, this guy's really good." And then we rolled again and again, and I was like, "He's getting even better, like at a rapid pace." And like it was seriously like it was really really impressive and truly like you're one of my favorite people I've ever rolled with just because it's so fun. I mean, we're buddies, so like it's not that big of a
Yeah.
deal. But on top of that, like you improved so quickly, and your wife is in the same boat. I mean, she's
Oh,
gotten so good.
it's been, I can honestly say it having us start training, especially together, it changed our marriage. It's literally changed our marriage. I mean, from the friendships that we've made there to the friendships she's made there. She goes 4 or 5 days a week. She's going to gi, no gi, judo. She's competed already, and did very well. Like it's changed her as a person. I cannot speak highly enough about how much that has changed her training in jujitsu. It's just it's amazing. Obviously, I didn't take to it like she did. I like to do it. I'm a little bit older. My body's, I tore my meniscus, and for me, it's just, hey, I just want to go there. I want to talk crap to people and have fun and laugh. And um, I talked to Pedro a few times after some classes, and initially I wanted to be that aggressive guy. It's like, hey, I want to be able to roll with Joel. I want to be able to roll and compete with those guys. And then it's like, dude, these guys are half my age, man. I can't keep up with these kids without breaking something. You know what I mean? So Pedro's like, hey, man, every gym needs somebody that helps out the new guys when they come in. And I'm, me, I love to talk to people. I love to help people. So usually when the new guys come in, I'm the guy that gets to help the new guys. And um, it's kind of nice that I've been training for a while. So I'm not now I'm starting to see things. It's like, oh yeah, I remember this. I remember that.
You and I were so close that Pedro would get mad at us for just talking. I mean, we would just be drilling and then we just jump into
Yeah.
a conversation and we couldn't get out of it. I mean, seriously, Pedro, I can never say enough good things about that guy. I mean, he's just incredible. I really I just miss being around those guys. Right before Allie and I moved, I dislocated my shoulder, and so I wasn't around as much as I wanted to be.
Yeah.
But man, I mean, just how great is having someone at the helm like Pedro for you?
It, Amazing, man. And he is a true student of the game. I'll never forget the time that I asked him for some tips on things. And he said, hey, I'll do you have an iPhone? I'll forward you over some notes that I take. I said, oh, you got some notes? He shows me his phone, pages and pages, hundreds, thousands of pages of notes. You go in there and ask that guy, hey, what'd you do on Sunday? Oh, I went to the park and watched jujitsu videos, studied jujitsu. Oh, what'd you do last night? I studied jujitsu. I mean, he's a student of the game.
He's
And I
incredible.
love that.
I do too. And I love that about him. I miss it. I miss them. I miss the whole school. It's just full of good people. And so you're in good hands over there for sure. Let's jump
Yeah.
back into the broadcasting thing a little bit. I asked you about the hardest part. I asked you your favorite fight. I do have to ask you, what is your favorite overall thing about broadcasting?
I just love being there, man. I love being there on fight night. You know how I am. I love interacting with people. I love interacting with the fighters. I just love it, man. It's just that's like we work so hard to get up to that point. And once it happens, it's like, hey, this is showtime, man. This is our night to shine. You know what I mean? Um, Obviously I don't feel like there's any pressure, so it's a little easier for me. I know you and Jordan, you guys put so much into it, and there's a lot of pressure behind the scenes with you guys. And I just try to lighten it up, man, and have some fun, and let's do this.
And I can't thank you enough for that because sometimes you're like, hey man, we're just having fun here. And I'm
Yeah,
like, you're right. You're right. And I'm like, oh, the instant replay and the graphics aren't sliding out quick enough and blah, 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 blah. And you're just like, hey man, we're just having fun. And I'm like, you're right, Jason. You're absolutely right.
Oh, and you're pretty easy to read when you're mad too. I'm like, oh, he's pissed about something.
Well, it's so funny because I always tell people like I may like I don't know if you remember when my mom and her
Oh yeah.
husband
Oh
came
yeah.
and everything,
Yep.
and Allie was there and my buddy
Yep.
Dre. And I told my mom before, I was like, you're gonna be right behind us. I was like, I may look pissed, I may look upset, I may look like I want to, punch someone in the face. I'm having the time of my life. And specifically when I'm standing there with you, as well as whoever else might be there as the third person in the booth, like I am just amped for whatever is about to happen. And it's seriously, man, we're coming up on a year of calling these fights together. And it's just like
Crazy.
it's just been the most fun thing. It's John Anik always says, there are 13 UFC pay-per-views, there are 14 Super Bowls during the year. It's the day of the Super Bowl, and it's the 13 UFC pay-per-view events that happen throughout the year. I feel that way about Fierce. I'm like, there's the Super Bowl, and then there's every single Fierce event. And those are like the biggest days of the year. And so you always want to make sure you do them right, but you also want to make sure that you're being a good partner to the other people in the booth. And I think if there's anyone who's like the team player of the year, it's you, Jason. I mean, you've done an incredible job, and I just really appreciate you. We don't talk
Well,
enough about the UFC anymore, man. I miss
I
talking
know.
UFC with
I
you.
know.
And
I
so
know.
I mean, you'll text me, and I love when you text me because I'm like, oh, sweet, I can get my UFC bug out. Your thoughts on what was, in my opinion, one of the greatest UFC pay-per-views I've ever seen.
That was amazing. And I missed a little bit of it because I worked a little bit late and I was driving home, but I had it up in my car. My daughter, when I picked up my daughter, she's like, I knew you were gonna be watching the fights. And that card was just stacked. And it's funny, I think I sent you the video. My daughter took a Snapchat video. Joel and a bunch of people from the gym were over, and we were screaming 11 o'clock at night. My daughter, poor daughter, she's almost 13. She voice records us screaming about the fight and the Izzy fight when he knocked him out. And initially, I think I even texted you at this. I said that was the Hail Mary of all Hail Marys. And then when I rewatched it, that wasn't a Hail Mary. Like that was calculated. Like he legit knew what he was doing there. That was planned. And that, I mean, I like Izzy. I love his fighting style. I'm not the biggest fan of his personality, but you cannot deny what that guy brings to the table with his fight IQ. That was amazing.
My wife asked me a very interesting question. I'm going to pose it to you as well. She asked me,
Okay.
Leon's kick last August in Salt Lake City or Izzy's knockout of Alex Pereira?
Um, Nothing's gonna top that Edwards Usman kick for me, just because we were there live. It was my wife and I's anniversary. That was epic. Under a minute left. The Izzy thing was good, right? But it was the second round, right?
Second round.
Second round, he was taking a lot of damage in his legs, and maybe he was playing possum a little bit, but I the legs for sure were getting compromised with Izzy, and just the way Edwards set that kick up in that, a minute left in the fifth round of a fight that he's losing. Like he's
Bad.
losing 3 rounds to 1. I mean, he's close in maybe another round, I thought, but he's losing 3-1 going into that fifth round. And then to get head kicked like that, oof, oof.
Do you
I mean,
think
against the guy that they were talking about was the GOAT. Like they were talking about him as the greatest 170er of all time. Like Usman was at the top of the game. That and he pulled that off.
Yeah, I think what's so crazy is like I remember Dana when he was in Salt Lake was like Kamaru Usman is the greatest welterweight of all time, and there were people saying, well, GSP, like mainly just GSP. It's like, well, I mean,
Yeah.
GSP is widely known as the greatest of all time to many people, and he was like, nope, Kamaru is the greatest of all time, like for welterweights. And so it was so interesting. I got to ask you about that Izzy KO. Do you think that's the greatest celebration of all time?
Oh, that was epic, man.
How cool was that?
That bow and arrow was epic. And then for him to do the same thing to his son, which I call is a little petty, but hey, I mean,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah, I'm not one for bringing kids into things like that, but I do think that the bow and arrow specifically, not the dropping in front of the kid, but the bow and arrow
yeah,
was something that I think is just. I mean, the photos. I mean, it's up there with Ali, like some of the greatest sports
epic.
photos I've ever seen.
That epic. Yeah, epic. I don't even know if we'll see something else like that again. That was amazing.
I want to pick your brain really quickly on Raul Rosas Jr. We kind of see him become human in that last fight during the Dana White
Yep.
Contender Series in his debut. He looked pretty much unbeatable in a lot of ways, and he looked like, oh, there's a reason he's here, and still rightfully so. I mean, he's a very talented fighter, but your thoughts on just what he looked like on Saturday and what you think the road looks like for him in the future?
You know, I think I think the kid has a lot of potential, but I think they've proved once again that coming in the UFC at 18 years old and you're fighting grown men, and he's fighting a guy that had already had, what was it, 3 fights in the UFC already, if I'm not mistaken.
I believe you're right. Yeah.
Christian Rodriguez, yeah. I believe he'd already have 3 fights in the UFC. That's huge. It didn't matter how good he did, but to have that experience in there, I mean, you're throwing an 18-year-old kid on the main card. You bump Chris Curtis off the main card for this kid. And I don't want to say he got exposed a little bit. I hate to say that. He's a kid. It was a lesson for him. Um, I don't think he should take another UFC fight. I think they should put him in like the developmental thing. I don't know if they can do that. Drop him back down to LFA. That's probably what they should have done, because I felt like he got the Sage Northcutt treatment where they're just pushing this kid along, and they're trying to promote him. But man, it just shows that it's another level when you get to the UFC and you fight guys that have already been fighting there. You're fighting the best of the best, man.
Speaking about other levels, when we talk about the people that we get to call fights for, sometimes they're 1-2 fights away from the UFC when they make that walk for fierce. Who would you say is a fighter who is UFC material, who you believe could make it to that next level, in your humble opinion, from what you've seen cage side?
There's a few guys. There's a few guys right now that I think are super close. Obviously, I'm going to say Joel, even though he just came off a loss, I think he learned a lot from it. A couple guys that are going to be on the top. Julian Ruiz, man, phenomenal performance. Kent Mafaleo has just been on an absolute tear. Another guy that's not even a pro yet that we're going to see fight for a title, April 21st, Andrew Mickelson, has everything. He is big. He's athletic. He's fast. He's another guy. I'm probably leaving some guys out of it, but right off the top of my head, Julian and Kent are probably the two top guys right now that I see that are just like, hey man, these guys are pretty close to being ready.
What would you say is, obviously there's Joel with his finish, the body shot. In recent memory, in fights that you and I have called together, what would you say is the most impressive moment or the most impressive win that you've seen in that cage?
Carson Hardman ×2, because he did it 2 fights in a row. His first fight for the 170 belt against Dunkel, he talked about it on the podcast or during the post fight interview. He was out. He literally was out, knocked out, and woke back up, grabbed a heel, and got the heel hook, and ended up winning the belt. But a knocked out Cole comes back his next fight, and he's getting destroyed in the first round, like beaten the first, like it's bad. Ends up hurting him, and ends up finishing him in the second round. Like the guy is just amazing. Honorable mention to my boy Jerome Hatch with his knockout. That was just, I mean, with the bad blood those two haven't already fought before, and I don't think his opponent's missing my mind right now. But that knockout, Kent Mafaleo's knockout to win the belt, was just epic as well. Those are ones that stand out the most to me right now.
I think it's really interesting. Your role is so important to the broadcast, but one of the big things is that you're the first person that interviews those fighters after that big moment happens. What is that like? And like other things in terms of your broadcasting abilities, it has grown and developed, and you have gotten so good at it, man. Like so good at it. What is it like interviewing a fighter, being one of the first people to talk to someone after potentially their dreams coming true, something that they always hoped would happen? What's it like being in there with them?
I feel like I'm just in the moment, right? Like I wanna, initially I didn't know what to say, man. I'm just rambling stuff off in the early beginnings, but now it's like, hey man, I want to talk about the fight and what they did and how they set up that finish and what's next for them. It's so exciting to see. You take like Hannah Silva winning the belt. It's probably one of my favorite, and she's just smiling and dancing and just so happy. And to see them in that moment is just epic. Or you see a guy like David Kim in his last fight, he gets a big win, and you could just see you and I know behind the scenes how much pressure this kid was on, coming into this fight, and he gets that win, and you could just see it just come off of him. And, I love it. I honestly, and I didn't think I would like it. I was honestly scared as hell the first time I did it, but now I love it, man. It's like my favorite part.
Where do you think that excitement or when do you think that change happened from, I'm kind of scared of this position, to being like, oh, I really look forward to doing this?
I think just getting more comfortable with doing it, getting a little bit more knowledgeable, paying it, and obviously, and honestly, working beside you and just seeing. People don't realize, they don't know, they hear you, but they don't see the work that you're putting in behind the scenes. They don't see the stacks of papers from top to bottom of notes that you've taken, and the weeks and hours and minutes that you've spent with all of your research to get up to there. And I think once I got to see how you work and how you operate, and I just trying to stay close to that, man, and just try to bring it for the people, because I know you're bringing it.
I truly, it almost makes me, sometimes I get emotional about it, thinking about just the opportunity that you guys gave me, but also the props that you gave me. I mean, you and Zach, but I mean, I've worked a lot closer with you, specifically cage side, during calling fights and things like that. And I know Zach knows and appreciates everything that I do as well. You did that from day one. And I truly believe that has helped me to kind of, get myself kind of a foot in the door, because like you said, like when I started, like no one knew who I was. Like I was working at Park City TV covering high school sports, and I just wanted to get into this space for so long. And if I didn't have your endorsement, if I didn't have Zach's endorsement, like I don't think I'm in the position where I'm at now, where you do hand me the keys to the broadcasting side of things, to the social media side of things. And so I can't thank you enough for that. I'm just about finished up in terms of questions. I think the last thing that I just kind of want to ask you about is this Fierce Fighting Championship 25 card that, when this airs, it will be fight week. It will be Wednesday, the day before weigh-ins. And so I do got to ask you, are you pulling up the card right now?
Yeah, I'm trying to pull up the card on here so I know what I'm talking about, because I don't remember right off the top of my head. Give me 2 seconds here. Right?
I would love to just kind of go down, pick your brain about some of the names that fly off the page, some of the people you're looking forward to, and some of the stakes at hand. I mean, when you look at this card, obviously the top of the bill is huge, but there's 4 titles on the line, 3 of those being amateurs. What are you looking forward to headed into this upcoming week?
I mean, for me, Viliami Akulu he was a name that I didn't mention on there, but he is the top amateur in the state right now. I mean, if you are a light heavyweight, you do not want to see Kulu in that cage. And I think he proved on his last fight, he fought with a little bit of anger in him, where we hadn't seen that before. Usually he starts off a little slow. He's such a nice guy, the respectful guy you'll ever meet, very respectful. But the last fight, Zach asked him after the fight, dude, what, you came out there just full force. And he's like, he was talking shit. He was talking crap to me at the weigh-ins. And so the guy pissed him off at the weigh-ins. And I'm like, man, do not make that guy mad. But I mean, this sets up for him. He gets this light heavyweight belt. He's going to be put in a position where, man, does he defend that belt? Does he go pro? What's next for him? You go down the line. You got Andrew Mickelson facing Roger. He's facing his toughest test, facing a 5-5 guy. Andrew Mickelson's another guy. He wins this belt. What does he do? Is he going to go pro? I mean, the guy's got all the tools. Those two are jumping out at me right away. Obviously, Hannah Silva, I loved watching her first fight. I think this is a phenomenal matchup in the strawweight division for the belt against Kelly McKay, who's 4-0. Same as Hannah Silva. Somebody's almost is got to go. That's a very intriguing fight. This card is the best Fierce card 2 day, top to
I
bottom.
I think so. I think between this card and the January card, it's one of those two, the best matchups I think we've ever seen top to bottom. And I think this one has so much sting on it because there are so many belts on the line. And on top of that, like Viliami, like he doesn't just have like a walk in the park fight for this belt. Like he's facing a 7-0 undefeated Shaler lad, trained his entire life, the brother of
Yeah.
Aspen lad, who's a
Lad.
former
Yep.
UFC fighter. I mean, crazy matchup there. And like he has been dominant along the way. And so all these different matchups are going to be very interesting. I personally can't wait for it either. When it comes to maybe a fight that doesn't have a belt on the line, who are some of the names that you're really looking forward to? For me personally, I cannot wait to see Nate Reinhardt versus Dustin Larson. Talked to Dustin a little bit yesterday. Was very interested to hear some of the things about him. You'll have to listen to the broadcast to hear more about him, his story, and things like that. But Nate Reinhardt has. We talked about him last time because he was supposed to be fighting on the card a month ago, but ends up fighting on
Yeah.
this card. I can't wait for this kid. He's one of my favorite amateur fighters in the entire state.
That should be a great, he took a loss in his first fight against Pedro Alcantar, which was a phenomenal fight, great back and forth fight, probably one of the fights of the night on that Fierce Challenger Series 2 card. Phenomenal fighter, a lot of potential. I That one's an exciting one. Another fighter that I really love to watch fight is Malachi Novosel. Love watching that kid fight. He brings it. He's still, I mean, he's a kid. I don't even think he's 21 yet. He might have just turned 21, but he's a kid. He's still a baby.
I believe he is 21.
He's 21. Yeah, he is. You're right. He is.
Another big one that people might not realize is as great as it is the Tyler Call versus Anthony Gillette fight. So Tyler Call been around for a little bit of time, had a 2-fight skid, won his last fight, trains out of Agema, one of the 4 original members of the Agema fight team back in 2019 in the summer when that gym opened up. His opponent, on the other hand, is a teammate of Melody Schrock's. Now, Melody Schrock, obviously back-to-back submission wins, very highly touted in the women's division, the amateur levels, the pound-for-pound ranking. She is rising up those ranks rapidly. When you look at who Tony Gillette is, I mean, he's an absolute stud. 21 submissions of his 28 jiu-jitsu competitions, 1-0, a 94-second fight against a tough opponent just a couple of months ago back in December. I mean, that's another great fight that I am really, really looking forward to.
Yeah, that one's going to be a banger as well. Just like I said, that's if I don't know if the card is going to be mapped out how it is on Tapology, but that's what we're going to start our night off with is from what Tapology's saying.
So we are starting with Nate versus
are we
Dustin, I believe.
Okay, nice.
Yeah,
nice.
And it also says for the middleweight championship that fight's not for a championship belt. I don't know why
Okay.
that says that on Tapology, but for the Tyler Call fight.
Oh, for the Tyler Call fight. Okay. Yeah, man. There's it's the card is just. I mean, another guy that's coming on, Andrew Boquette is another guy.
Yeah,
another heavyweight. And did you drop this podcast yet? Did you talk?
His podcast comes out tomorrow from when we're recording this, but it will be out by the time this comes out.
And I remember you told me some things that he said, and I remember him being on with Zach and I, and he is not short of words at all. No. He was pretty much calling everybody out in the heavyweight division after his last fight that he's a force to be reckoned with, and I think he's going to be a force to be reckoned with.
So I just posted a story on our Instagram saying, who's the fighter you're looking forward to the most? I'd say 85% of the responses that we got out of like 25, 30 were all Boquette.
Oh yeah.
People are really looking forward to him. And he's told me that what we saw a couple months ago is not his actual game, that we have we're just scratching the surface of what he can actually do. I cannot wait for that. But I'll also peel back the curtain because the podcast will have aired by this time. But he kind of told me that when it comes to fighting, he told me that the last fight, he was just full of gratitude in that post-fight interview. I remember we were both kind of like, I thought he was going to, talk a little bit more smack. He told me that's going to be the case this next time around, that he kind of got caught off guard by the emotions that he felt, but he said that's out of the way, that's done. And so I think you've got yourself an important post-fight interview if Andrew Boquette is able to get it done. We'll have to see. He's got a tough opponent. But if Andrew Boquette is to get it done, I think he's got a very specific call out, and I can't wait for it.
There's another guy on the card that I always love to watch is Trevor Bradshaw in our co-main event. Um, Obviously, his last fight, we were very happy with that KO knockout in the first round against our boy Andre Hafer. Shout out Trevor Bradshaw. But Trevor's been getting some work in up at Koa Kingdom with Bobby King, Joe Haro. Um, I know Thomas Hughes is up there too with Joel, so he's been getting some work up there, and he's a guy that he doesn't have the sexy record. He's 6-7. You look at it and you're like, oh, this guy's not any good, but he's been getting better lately. He
Yeah.
he has been he has been improving every fight. I mean, his last loss was to Mitch Ramirez, who should be on the Ultimate Fighter. I'm sorry, he lost against Connie before the right after that. So Connie was his last loss, but Connie Carrera and Mitch Ramirez his last two fights, and then he's looked great his last two. He's won his last two fights and looked phenomenal. So
I believe a third win would be like the longest win streak of his career since like very early on. I can't remember. It's on my board. It's ready to go. But I was doing his board a couple weeks ago. When was the last time he had a 3-fight win streak? Has he ever had one?
got to go back to his amateur career for that. He started 5-0 in his amateur, 6-0 in his amateur career,
That's
and then
right.
he lost his first three pro fights, and then he got a win, a loss, and then he just kind of bounced back and forth between those. But back in those days when he was fighting like the Joe Mamas, he was kind of known as a brawler, right? Like he just would go in there and he'd brawl. He's just throwing, he was just throwing, right? But after that Dominico Salas fight, where he just had that war with Dominico, I think you started to see him kind of switch a little bit. He started to kind of put things together. Um, he wasn't just that reckless brawler. Like he was actually showing that, hey, I got some skills, and I'm a fighter to be reckoned with here in Utah, and he's proven that recently.
This is why we have you, Jason, because you are able to just pull fights out from every which way and say this happened here and this happened here. And a quick stat on Trevor Bradshaw before we jump over to the main event talk. Trevor Bradshaw, 3 strikes landed, 1 unofficial significant strike, and it was the one that put his opponent to sleep. It only takes 1 from the guy. His hands are packed of steel. I mean, he is a one-shot knockout artist when he is on, and we'll hopefully have to see how he looks. He's facing a tough guy in Brian Neuro.
Yeah,
I don't know if you saw that stat that we posted. He
Oh
won.
yeah.
I think he went like 17-1 in his first 7 years or something like that. It's some insane number of fights that he won in a row between his professional career as well as his amateur career. And he's been in Bellator. I mean, he's been around. So Trevor Bradshaw's got a tough one up against him this week.
Yeah, he's definitely gonna have his hands full. The guy was undefeated amateur, started his pro career 4-0. Like you said, Bellator. The guy he's legit. Trevor's gonna have his hands full.
I can't wait for it, man. I do want to talk a little bit about the light heavyweight title that's on the line as well. Eric Wallin versus Jerome Hatch. Jerome coming off of a huge win on top of a win for the BYB championship belt as well. And so he gets a title fight against someone in Eric Wallin who they have fought in the past as well.
Yeah, they have fought in the past as well. Eric Wallin, if I'm not mistaken, got the knockout pretty early on in that fight. But this is years ago that those two fight. Those two go way back into Utah MMA fight scene. And Jerome he's kind of had a little resurgence lately, right? Like he's gotten some wins. He's gone over to bare knuckle. He's gotten some. I think he's undefeated in bare knuckle, if I'm not mistaken.
He is
4-0. Is he 4-0 in bare knuckle now?
3 or 4. I can't remember.
3 or 4-0. And he's the champ. He went over to Abu Dhabi and knocked this guy out. I'm not gonna lie, I didn't tell him this, but I was scared, man. I looked at that guy's record he was fighting. That Marco Martin Jack guy, he had like 20 fights and they're all bare knuckle. So I'm thinking, oh man, he's fighting this guy. That's all he does. But then I started thinking, Jerome's been fighting his whole life, man. Bare knuckle. Like he should be good, and he was, man. And I can't say enough good things about Jerome. I know there's people out there that have heard him on the podcast with Chris Curtis when we had him on here, and they didn't like the way that he talks, and they thought he was disrespectful. But there is not a more respectful guy, family guy, God-loving guy out there than Jerome Hatch. Like that guy he is an absolute stud. I highly recommend or go out and introduce yourself to Jerome Hatch. He's an absolute stud.
I do want to say Eric Wallin, Jerome Hatch, probably the 2 busiest boards I have ever had. The font size is down to like 8 or 9 to try to fit every single stat between these two. I mean, there is so much on the line between these two. I mean, they both have such long histories of combat sports that there's a lot to go over and there's a lot of stats. So if it does go later on into the rounds, you'll have fresh stats from us in the broadcast booth the entire time. But Jason, I cannot wait for this fight. I cannot wait for this entire card. It is absolutely stacked. And we've been talking, I think the longest I've ever talked with anyone on this new style of Damage Plan MMA podcast. I really appreciate the time, man.
Yeah, man. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it, Blake. You're a freaking stud. We need to get this over to John Anik, man. We need to get you some recognition.
Oh, I appreciate
I'm telling
it.
you, it's going to happen, man. I'm going to keep tagging John Anik until he pays attention.
Dude, one of these days, John
one of these
Anik
days, he's going to hear it. One of these days, he's going to hear it and be like, oh, this kid is good.
I was going to say he's going to hear and go, oh, this guy sucks. But that's
just when you're calling those UFC fights, just remember me. Just put me on that friends and family list to get in there and watch some fights.
I can never thank you for everything that you do for me, man. You, Zach, everyone at Fierce. So I really appreciate it. Thank you so much for your time.